Welcome to the human respiratory system, which is the second half of chapter 23 in your textbook. But it is a separate system, so it will be discussed separately, and you have a whole week for this chapter. So when we're looking at the human respiratory system, page 509 in your textbook, there are basically three phases that's occurring, and that's because we have to look at the exchange of gases. So first, we're breathing. That's one of the phases. Second, oxygen goes from the lungs to the rest of the body by the circulatory system. And then the final phase is to remove the CO2 from the cells and bring it back to the lungs. So there's a lot of stuff going on, even though it seems to be that we're just breathing in and out. So it is a little more complicated than it appears. So here is a picture, and you can see the red is the O2 and the blue is the CO2, which is coming out. So the red is in the arteries, being spread throughout the body from the heart, and the blue is coming from the heart to the lungs, and then you breathe out the CO2. So the respiratory system and circulatory system are tied real close together, and that's why they're both in the same chapter. But you can see, one, the breathing. Two, the transport of the gases by the circulatory system. And then three, the cells are getting what they need, the O2 and the CO2. So we've got to look at all three of those pieces, and we'll look at each one individually to see how the final exchange occurs at the cell level. So first we'll look at the anatomy of the respiratory system. And you breathe in through your nose and your mouth. As you know, they're connected from the digestive system. And the back of the throat is the pharynx, and that's where the digestive and respiratory system meet, because the air and food both go down the pharynx. But then the air continues into the trachea rather than down into your stomach, and it goes into the trachea. It passes the larynx first, which is the voice box, which is the enlarged area that you can see on the outside of the neck. And then the trachea, which is also called the windpipe, a very strong tube that does not bend easily at all, really, because if you bend your head forward, the windpipe is totally open. You can still breathe with your head bent forward. And that's very, very important to realize. The trachea is a tough cartilaginous tissue. From the trachea it goes to the bronchi. That's a double, plural, and there's two of them. One bronchus to each lung. And that's like a little smaller tube than the trachea. Then it branches into smaller tubes that are called bronchioles. And it's from the bronchioles down to the alveoli, which is the little air sacs where gas exchange occurs. The alveoli are microscopic. You will look at them underneath the microscope, but they're very, very thin, and that is where the gas exchange occurs. Okay, so here we have a picture, and you can see the pharynx, where the throat joins with the nasal cavity and the back of your mouth, the larynx, which is the voice box, the trachea, which is a very strong cartilaginous tube. And don't forget that there is something called the epiglottis that sits on top of the trachea to prevent the food from going into it when you're eating. As the trachea goes down, it branches into two bronchi, or bronchus, for not plural, singular. And you can see there's two of them, and the bronchioles, which are very smaller tubes. And you can see the bronchiole on the right picture, as you can see the red blood coming in, the blue coming in and the red going out. The blue is coming from the heart. That's venous blood. It's oxygen poor, and it encircles the alveoli, which are, you can almost compare them to like grape bunches. They're small, hollow sacs where the gas exchange occurs. So there's a huge capillary network surrounding the alveoli. Now you can see the bronchiole also is there, and that's a smaller tube. That's actually a terminal bronchiole, which is the smallest as they get when they go into the alveoli, so that the air coming in is going through the bronchiole to the alveoli so it can be exchanged. Also notice the heart and its location, and then at the very bottom is the diaphragm, which is the primary muscle that you use to get air in and out of the lungs. And we'll be looking at that dynamics soon. So the alveoli are very, very thin, one cell thick. Just like when we talked about the capillary system, when we talked about the circulation, the capillaries are very, very thin because that's where the gas exchange occurs. And what happens is the wall of the alveoli and the wall of the pulmonary capillary, which came from the heart, they're fused together so that they're in such close contact that the air can exchange between the alveolus into the circulation or the internal environment. So I put this picture up again just so you could take a look at it again and see how closely those blood vessels are entangled around the outside of the alveoli. They are fused together. It's very thin, so that the oxygen and carbon dioxide can exchange there, just like they do in the working muscles and in the entire body in the capillary system. This one also, I put this in because I thought it was a nice picture. You can see on the left the bronchus, the O2 going in, CO2 going out. Then you see the bronchioles, they're the smaller tubes, and the little alveoli, which they show in the picture on the right. So we're looking at one lung, and we're looking at the alveoli on the right. And you could see alveolus is the single for alveoli. Alveoli are the bunches. And here, again, I just am showing how close the capillary network is for the exchange to occur. And the alveolus is hollow inside. All it has is air in it. Just like the air you're breathing, you don't see it. Well, that's the same thing that's in your alveoli. They're hollow so that the air can go in and out. And you can see the blue transport from the heart because it's bringing the deoxygenated blood to the capillaries that surround the alveolus, and in turn the CO2 is diffusing out into the alveolus, and the O2 is diffusing into the capillary so that it's brought back to the left side of the heart and then taken to the systemic circulation around the body. One more picture showing this, and you could see the alveolus. You can see where the gas exchange is occurring, And it is diffusion that is occurring. And you need to remember diffusion is from high to low. So when you breathe in air, you're breathing in oxygen. So after you breathed in, you have brought oxygen into the alveolus. So there's more oxygen in the alveolus than there is CO2. So in turn, and then also the blood that's coming around from the heart, it's got a lot of CO2 in it. So the concentration of blood is higher in the blood than it is in the alveolus. So what happens is a double exchange from high to low is occurring. The CO2 is higher in the blood than it is in the alveolus, so it's going to go from high to low. It's going to leave the blood and go to the alveolus. Exact same thing is happening with O2. You've got more O2 after you did a breath in. The O2 is going to diffuse into the blood because it has a higher CO2 concentration. So the exchange is occurring, and it's all because of diffusion and concentration gradients.